Hi folks, in this video I'm going to be talking to you about Peter Piper by Run-DMC from their album Raising Hell, which is a favorite of mine when I was a kid and continues to bang today. So this record is based on an iconic sample, and it's a sample that has a pretty improbable origin story. It begins in 1973 with a Paul Simon song called Take Me to the Mardi Gras. And I love Paul Simon very deeply, but this certainly does not sound like a promising beginning for a hip-hop classic. Let's listen.
Come on, take me to the Mardi Gras, where the people sing and play, where the dancing is elite, and there's music in the street both night and day. Hurry, take me to the Mardi Gras, in the city of my dreams. You can legalize your laws, you can wear your summer clothes in New Orleans.
So that's nice. Yeah, it's not awesome. It's kind of a Muzak version of New Orleans music, and Paul Simon's got some uncharacteristically cliched lines in those lyrics. Not really his best work. But a couple years later, a fusion jazz musician named Bob James did a jazz version of this tune, and I'm going to start it where he starts playing the melody. So again, it's nice. Kind of got a funkier beat than the Paul Simon version. It's kind of cool that he's got the wah-wah pedal going on his electric piano, that wah-wah-wah-wah-wah-wah-wah-wah. But still, doesn't exactly sound like the basis for a hip-hop classic until you listen to the beginning of his recording, which is this. Okay, so I lose interest as soon as the melody starts, but that intro is incredible, yeah? There's a lot going on in there. You've got a super, super funky drum beat. You've got this great bell pattern, this agogo bell. There's a weird dissonant synthesizer chord. There's some other metal percussion. There's some samples of radio static. I mean, there was a lot going on in there. It's really the first 4 bars of it that are the really heavy, iconic part, so let's just loop that up. Yeah. Can you hear that guy sing Rise and Shine? Right in there. Cool. Yeah, I mean, that's like a perfect hip-hop instrumental right there, yeah? Okay, so this record has been sampled hundreds of times across many, many iconic hip-hop, techno, dance music tracks. But certainly its most iconic usage is Peter Piper by Run-DMC. Before we listen to Run-DMC, we're going to listen to one more little part of the Bob James recording. This is coming out of the melody going into his piano solo. So a lot of cool stuff going on in here. You've got this very weird dissonant synthesizer part, then you've got this really nice do-do-do-do-do-do-do, that little piano riff. Underneath that little riff, you've got a trombone going, right, like doing an upward pitch slide, very New Orleans. And then you've got this nice cymbal crash that's also got the bell on top of it. Let's listen to it again. So in addition to the main bells pattern from the beginning of the track, you're going to be hearing that quite a bit in Peter Piper. So let's listen.
Now Peter Piper picked peppers, but run rock, rhyme, Humpty fell down. That's his art. Time, Jackie, nimble, what? Nimble, and he was quick, but jam, mass mud, faster, Jack saw Jay's dick. Now little Bo Peep Cole lost her sheep, and Rip Van Winkle fell hell asleep. And out of chilling summer in Wonderland, Jack serving Jill bucket in his hand. And damn, Master Jay's making out that sound. The turntables might wobble, but they don't fall down.
So in another video, I talked about the Reminisce Over You by Pete Rock and CL Smooth, and that one also uses a sample that's so heavy and so iconic that that song has no chorus. They just use the sample as like the hook. And so here also in Peter Piper has no chorus. The hook is doom do 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 doom do doom do do. Like that's how iconic and attention grabbing that sample is. Yeah. So let's step through this in a little bit more detail and look at which parts of Take Me to the Mardi Gras we're hearing.
Now Peter Piper picked peppers, but run rock, rhyme, Humpty fell down. That's his art. Time, Jackie, nimble, what? Nimble, and he was quick, but jam, mass mud, faster, Jack saw Jay's dick. Now little
So that is a scratch of the very beginning of the melody. Do 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 do.
Mass mud, faster, Jack saw Jay's dick. Now little Bo Peep
And then into the bells.
and Rip Van Winkle fell hell asleep.
But this is not just the bells. There's also an 808 drum machine under there to kind of beef it up.
And Rip Van Winkle fell hell asleep. And out of chilling summer in Wonderland, Jack serving Jill bucket in his hand. And damn, Master Jay's making out.
And there he scratches in a little bit of this. Here it is. Oh, here it is. Then the drum machine. And there he's scratching in the beginning of the solo section.
The turntables might wobble, but they don't fall down.
And there he's scratching in the very, very beginning of Take Me to the Mardi Gras. And something interesting is happening there. So Jam Master Jay, the DJ in Run-DMC, has got 2 copies of the Bob James record on his 2 turntables. And this is standard practice in hip-hop of the pre-digital sampling age. Because if you wanted to loop something from a vinyl record and you didn't have a digital sampler, the way you had to do it was what they called the merry-go-round in the early days of hip-hop. You had 2 copies of the record, and one part of the desired loop was playing, and then you had the other copy of the record queued up to the beginning of the loop. So when copy 1 got to the end of the loop, you quickly switched the crossfader over to copy 2, which would then play the loop. So meanwhile, you could silently back up copy 1 to the beginning of the loop. And if that sounds difficult, it is. It really takes a lot of practice. But what's happening here is Jam Master Jay is letting both copies of Take Me to the Mardi Gras play at the same time, and they're a little bit out of sync with each other, and it creates this kind of interesting, kind of flammy effect. So you can really clearly hear the the bells are like a little out of tune with each other because they didn't start up playing at exactly the same time or exactly the same speed. You hear how dissonant that is? I doubt that was completely intentional, but that's a kind of happy accident that you sometimes get from analog gear, which would be easy to avoid with digital gear, with a digital sampler or a computer. But then, what's the fun in that, yeah? Alright, so Take Me to the Mardi Gras is not the only record that Jam Master Jay is scratching in Take Me to the Mardi Gras. He's also got a copy of John Davis and the Monster Orchestra, I Can't Stop, from 1976. So that's an incredible drum break, and it's been used by many, many hip-hop producers, but Jam Master Jay is most interested in one note of it, this horn blast that comes right at the beginning of the drum break. So whenever you hear this kind of blah horn blast in a Run-DMC song, it's usually that. And he's used it in other songs too. He used it in My Adidas a lot. So you're going to hear him scratching that horn blast a bunch of times.
He's a big bad wolf, and yo, the three bigs. He's a big bad wolf in your neighborhood. Not bad, meaning bad, but bad, meaning good. There it is.
And then he just scratches the beginning of the bells. So you can hear him scratching that first bell hit back and forth.
There it is.
So like I said, the bells has been sampled many, many, many times, but I certainly associate it with Peter Piper. A lot of people do. And this raises an interesting question about authorship and ownership. So the song Take Me to the Mardi Gras was written by Paul Simon. The Bob James cover was very much a creation of Bob James. But when people think about that break, the we tend to think of it as being by Jam Master Jay. And it's not like that Jam Master Jay created it from scratch, but he did have the wit and the insight to isolate it from its context and put it in this new context, to scratch it, to loop it, to combine it with an 808 drum machine, to have, Run and DMC rapping over it. And I very much think of that as being like a form of authorship. Like, yeah, he certainly doesn't own the original record, and he doesn't even own the concept of sampling or scratching that record because many hip-hop producers did it before he did. But his usage is so iconic and so strong that I do think it's kind of correct to think of this song as being by Jam Master Jay more than it's by Bob James, if that makes sense. So now I'm going to play you something that samples Peter Piper, which is a Missy Elliott song from 2002 called Work It.
Is it worth it? Let me work it. I put my thing down, flip it and reverse it. It's your primitive is why I need. It's your primitive is why I need. If you got a big, let me search it to find out how hard I gotta work. Yeah, it's your primitive is why I need. It's your primitive is why I need. Super fellas, I like the way you work that. Super ladies, whoa, you sure know how to work that.
So the parts of Peter Piper that are being sampled in there include, the Bob James, the bells, and also include the horn blast from John Davis and the Magic Orchestra. But you're not supposed to be thinking about Bob James or the Magic Orchestra. You're supposed to be thinking about Peter Piper, right? That's what this sample is referring to, even though it does technically include the kind of meta samples of the older tracks. So as I mentioned, the bells has been sampled many, many, many times beyond Peter Piper. I'm just going to play one particularly noteworthy usage. This is Mantronic's King of the Beats. Now that sounds quite different from Peter Piper, right? I mean, obviously they've included a bunch of other samples on top of it, but they're not sampling the entire go-go bell pattern. They're not sampling the whole doom doo 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 doom doo doom doo doo. They're just sampling the beginning part of it, the din 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 din. And I can't figure out exactly which part of it they're sampling, or I would just loop that up for you so you could hear it. But so King of the Beats is itself so iconic that it has itself been sampled many, many times. So this version of the bells has kind of taken on a life of its own. So for example, 2 years later, Snap in The Power used not a sample of Bob James, but a sample of Mantronic's.
I got the power, power, power.
for sack, front to back, in this thing called rap. Feel like a double rhyme double on a heavily level. Bang the bass, turn up the treble. Blast for mine day and night all the time. 714,
So, as I said, both the original Take Me to the Mardi Gras and Peter Piper and Mantronic's King of the Beats have all been sampled many times. It's very interesting to go on Who Sampled and trace all the evolution of these things. I just want to close by once again talking about this idea of using existing recorded music as raw material to make new music, especially to play an existing recording like it's an instrument, the way that Jam Master Jay does with the scratching. I mean, it's a remarkable idea, and it's one that I feel like the culture hasn't totally caught up with. Now, the hip-hop people did not invent this idea. John Cage and Karl-Heinz Stockhausen and people like that were experimenting with manipulating existing recordings, all the way back in the 1940s and 50s, but they were using it for like impenetrable avant-garde experiments. And I feel like it's one thing to do that, but it's another thing to use this extremely avant-garde idea in the service of a song that is so instantly accessible that, I, at age, I don't know, how old was I when that came out? 11, was able to just instantly get it and instantly connect to it. And I'm still able to just get a lot of enjoyment and excitement out of all these decades later. That to me is like a more sophisticated aesthetic accomplishment. So anyway, thank you very much for watching.